Hello and welcome to the State of Shakespeare. I'm Kenneth Cavender.
And I'm Jim Elliott.
And today on the program, we are joined by Dave Hitz. Hello, Dave.
Hi.
So Dave Hitz co-founded NetApp, a Silicon Valley data management company, in 1992. He's played many roles there, including programmer, evangelist, architect, VP of engineering, mascot, strategist, cheerleader, and coach. I want to hear more about that. Before we dive into that, we'll give a little bit more of the background relative to Shakespeare. Dave co-founded Play On, which is translating all of Shakespeare's plays into performable 21st century English. It's been called the single largest literary translation project since the King James Bible, and also, incidentally, it's been called, quote, a waste of money and talent.
I believe that was Jim Shapiro's op-ed in the New York Times.
Yeah, we did. We talked to him, and he did mention Play On. We also talked to some. Our listeners will perhaps remember that we've also talked to some of the collaborators in the Play On project in the past, and we're looking forward to digging into it further now that some time has passed, and these projects are a lot further on in development. But that's all to come in this interview. And what we should say at this point is, welcome, Dave. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited about it.
Dave, you say you started off your career as a self-proclaimed evangelist in Silicon Valley. What's that all about?
So when I started my career, I really had two skills. One of them was programming. It turns out I'm bad at some things and good at others. But programming is one of the things I'm good at. And also just telling people about what I was doing. So I did a startup called NetApp, which you've most likely never heard of. We do the data storage that if you file your taxes electronically through the IRS, it lands on gear we sold them. So it's that sort of thing. All the special effects for Lord of the Rings were done were stored on our systems. So, cool stuff in the world. Data's a big deal these days. So I started that way as a programmer and an evangelist, tell people the story of our stuff. And eventually moved into management, had hundreds of people working for me, and then eventually figured out I didn't like that. So I got out of that and more into strategic roles. So that's my career side. The Shakespeare side, I've been going to see Shakespeare plays since I was a little kid. I mean, my parents took me down in San Diego to, I forget which one, but one of the ones where you go out on grass and the kids run around and there's guys in tights on the stage. And it was just ever since I was a little kid, Shakespeare was a fun thing. So all the way through to going to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, that's probably where I've seen the most Shakespeare since 1982. So, I've been going there for ages as well. So it's just always been a part of my life in some form.
How did you make the leap then to becoming a producer?
Boy, a producer, what a big word. What I will tell you is it started as a fantasy. Here's what I noticed. When I go see Shakespeare plays, and I'm not a Shakespeare scholar, I'm the guy in the bottom 50% of the audience, right? What I figured out is if I don't do the homework, I really don't enjoy myself. If I do the homework, and the homework could be, reading the plays out loud with friends, that takes a while, but if you have the time, reading the footnotes, that's the most painful. Even just getting a no fear Shakespeare. If I do the homework, then I enjoy the productions. And if I don't do the homework, I'm just blah, blah, blah. I'm one of those people that struggles with the language.
I would like to take a moment to just ask you about the homework exactly, because is it the stories that you're not following, or is it just that you get lost in the language of Shakespeare?
What I find is a lot of Shakespeare plays have plot pivots, and there's a teeny bit of language that indicates a plot pivot, they're friends, they're friends, they're friends, they're enemies. What just happened? They're enemies, they're enemies, they're enemies, they're friends. What just happened? And if I read the no fear, then I can let go of the concern about I'm just confused. I don't get it. And then I can listen to the language, I can watch the pageantry, if it's a good production, I can just enjoy it. Whereas if I don't, there's just too much stuff I feel I don't understand the characters, I don't get why I should care about them, the plot. Not every play does that, and a play that Romeo and Juliet, they're going to love each other, their families hate each other, okay, they're going to kill themselves. If one that but even with those, I find, for me, the easiest, the fastest homework is, these days it's a play-on play. If I can get a hold of the translation. But a no fear is fine. The no fear is not about the language. The no fear just smooths out all the bumps so that I know what's happening. I read it the day before. Then scene by scene, it's like, yeah, I've got it. My brain, and that loosens me up to just enjoy the whole experience.
Well, the kind of homework that you're talking about sounds like more than just a casual investment. I'm not sure that the average playgoer is going to take the step of reading the play with the footnotes beforehand, or even reading it aloud with friends. That puts you, I think, in the realm of Shakespeare super fandom, I would say.
Yeah, but I've never, I think Shakespearean English is a language you can learn. I think it's probably closer than Spanish and Portuguese, but I think it's probably farther from present-day English than, say, Norwegian and Danish, which are very close. And some people have just learned that language. And the people who have, it's a struggle because we call both of them English. And I think a lot of the people who've learned that language don't realize the extent to which regular folks struggle with it, and just get confused and then don't go to another Shakespeare play.
Right. Yeah.
So we lose them, which is such a shame. I mean, his plays are so awesome. One of the things that I realized, I hadn't really understood this, but Shakespeare is the most translated author behind God. So the Bible's been translated more, but Shakespeare's number 2. And that tells me something interesting, because a lot of people will say, oh, Shakespeare's just about the words. How could you contemplate changing the words? He's a poet. It's just the words. If it was just the words, it wouldn't have been translated into French, German, Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, like almost any language. It turns out the plots are really good too, and the characters are really good too. So I would never tell people don't go to the original, and I hope that our project can be a pathway that people say, wow, I'd like to learn that language. I mean, I've had people tell me they went and learned Russian because they love Chekhov, right? I mean, that's a rare person that does that, but Shakespearean English is easier.
How on earth does it go from you have an idea that maybe it would be great to have modern English translations of Shakespeare's texts to actually saying, okay, this is something we're going to do, and this is how we're going to go about it?
Well, the magic is a woman named Louis Duthit, who's the executive director of Play On, which is an independent 501c. Now we split apart from Oregon Shakespeare, mostly for reasons having to do with things like negotiating with Actors Equity, for the festival that we just performed. So I went to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Like I said, I've been going there for years, and I said, hey, I just have this fantasy. I would love once in my life to hear Shakespeare in my native language, present-day English. And the first time I went, the artistic director was like, yeah, not my thing, which is fine, right? Everybody gets to choose what they're interested in. But I went a number of years later. We got a new artistic director named Bill Rausch, and I said the same thing to him. And it turned out he had spent part of his career doing productions of Shakespeare in small towns, often rural towns, and he used community actors, and they would work together. Like, how can we understand this? And so he was very familiar with the idea of wrestling with the language and helping people. And so he said, that's really interesting. Why don't you come back? And my brother and I went back and talked with Bill and Louis Duthit, who was the head dramaturg at OSF at the time. And she got very interested. At first, she was skeptical. And then she said, well, what does this mean? And we did Timon of Athens first. We did Timon of Athens because that's nobody's favorite play.
Right.
It's all when you do the whole canon, like it's Timon that's last.
Right.
And so we did that. And in fact, we got it all the way to a production at the Alabama Shakespeare Festival, which is amazing. I had no idea. It was the largest arts donation in the history of the U.S. when it was made. It's like a square mile with lakes and swans and 2 enormous theaters. Man, I was blown away.
Yeah,
and they did a production of Timon of Athens. They did our translation as the closing of their canon. And the audience loved it. People were just so excited to just be able to hear it. And so we did the first one, and it was good. We did Ellen McLaughlin's Pericles was the second one. I love that play. I know not everyone has it in their favorites list, but every time I hear it, it's moving up in my appreciation. And we had a production of that in Orlando And I was kind of frustrated with how long it was taking, and I was brainstorming with Louis about, is there some way to do this faster? Because it was taking like 3 years per and a couple. And Louis came back, and her idea, she said, Dave, I've been the bottleneck. I've been the dramaturg for all the ones we've done. I think we should fire off in parallel a separate translator for every play, a separate dramaturg for every play, and do them all at once. And so I'd like to get all 39 done in 3 years. And I'll tell you, I had two immediate reactions. Immediate reaction number one was, you are effing crazy. Like, there's no way. And reaction number two was, but so what's the harm? Maybe we get half of them. Like, that would be awesome, and we'd have half. Okay. And I will tell you, Louis pulled it off. I believe that she cashed in a lifetime of favors. She called people up, and I've talked to a lot of the translators, and they said, if it was anybody but Louis, I learned such interesting things from the translators. So Kenneth Cavender taught me this phrase. He said, translations are like lovers. The beautiful ones are not faithful, and the faithful ones are not beautiful.
Wow, that's an awesome metaphor.
As you wrestle, and I don't want to get into the whole sexism of that statement, but as you wrestle with the translation, do you simplify and change? Or simplify is the wrong word, but because I hope these things come out as complicated works of art that reflect Shakespeare's original complicated ideas. But do you make a change in the language that possibly isn't as beautiful as Shakespeare's original words? And in fact, realistically, I think we've hired good poets, but to argue that you're doing it better than Shakespeare's original words, like, that's a hell of a claim, right?
Okay, so when we first heard about Shakespeare Play On, I think we heard about it through some of our guests that we were talking to, and there was definitely some critical response to it when it was first announced, and we were definitely prepared to be skeptical at first. But that having been said, what are some of the virulent reactions that you've received to the project so far?
Well, let me talk about what we just experienced in the festival, because we did a festival where we just performed 39 readings of all 39 plays that Shakespeare might have written. I know the canon is more typically 37 or 36. But we figured while we're desecrating the bard, we might as well desecrate everything he might have wrote. I will tell you, the audience reaction has been almost uniformly positive. We had one guy who started out, and he had a dog-eared copy of the original text of the play we had just seen, and he said, as a portfolio purist, I find myself somewhat surprised to have liked this. The single biggest objection we got, one particular woman was frustrated. Most of our playwrights didn't choose to do this, but one translator threw in quite a few F-bombs. She was actually from Australia, where I think an F-bomb is roughly equivalent to gosh. And, we did get the feedback from one person in the audience who said, I don't really like that. Are the rest of them going to be like that? It's like, no, it turns out the rest of them aren't going to be like that. People were, one of the common comments was that it still felt like Shakespeare. It still sounded like Shakespeare. There are a few places where translators made the decision to use modern words, and I was interested in how I reacted to that. Some people just hated any modern word. What I figured out was they bothered me, and there were only a handful. They bothered me if they referred to nouns in the play. So in one particular place, people were going from one city to another, and one of the characters said, well, we have to catch the bus. And my brain went, boing! In another play, it was metaphorical, and a woman was described as having a supersonic mouth. That one didn't bother me. I think it's different for Brutus to cut Shakespeare with a laser-sharp knife than for Brutus to cut Shakespeare with a laser.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
One of the things that's so wonderful about having had a whole set of different translators take a run at this is we're learning a lot about what works, what doesn't work, what audiences like, what they don't like. And, the next generation of translators can take that.
With all of that having been said, presumably somebody has to carry a torch for the integrity of the original work and for keeping the beauty of the language itself alive and for, educating the audience. So what do you say to those who object to the quote, dumbing down of Shakespeare's language in the translations?
Well, I would say see a couple of them. They are not dumbed down. In the talkbacks that we've had after the productions, what I find so interesting is some of the talkbacks are about the translation and the translation process. Other of the talkbacks, people are just like, I want to dig into the topic of the play. I'll tell you one in particular, The Merchant of Venice.
Mm-hmm.
When that language is just clear through, oh my God, it's wrenching. It seemed so racist and so horrible, and yet, because the people were so mean to Shylock, it almost made him more sympathetic as a character. Here's an observation. Every translation is a new work of art. There's nothing stopping anybody from translating Moliere or the Greek plays into whatever damn thing they want, right? And nobody's protecting the integrity of the translation. That every artist gets to create the work of art they want. Now, it may be a horrible work of art that nobody wants to see, right? Time will tell. And so I don't see that we've created the new canon. There was some defenders of the play on project that were, the far end of it. This was a Wall Street Journal op-ed. Well, those original plays are pretty crufty. It's about time we retired them. Thank God somebody's doing the replacements. We're like, no. When a translator does a translation of Moliere, the original Moliere play is sitting there just fine. Thank you very much, right?
That leads me to this question, which is, what is the end game for the Play On project? You clearly don't want to replace Shakespeare. So where do you see the Play On plays residing in the culture of the theater?
Here's my ultimate fantasy. If you go see a translation, a play that's in translation, check out the playbill. Often the director will have some notes about, well, the last time we performed this Chekhov play, we used this 1972 translation by so-and-so, but that one was feeling a little dated, and plus it was more poetic, and we really wanted to dig into the political issues, and so therefore we choose this one from 2003. What I would like is for there to be a competing ecosystem of translators wrestling with Shakespeare, so that when a director does a production, you can see in the playbill, I wanted to use the original Shakespeare because I really wanted to focus on the language and the beauty of the language. And another director will say, I am so interested in today's political issues around legislating morality, and so I wanted the translation of Measure for Measure because I wanted those ideas to pop. That's what happens with every major playwright. Every 10 or 20 years, another translator comes along and says, it's time for another one, and I can do better. And that's great. And they make their works of art, and sometimes the new one shines, and sometimes it doesn't. That's my fantasy. That it's not the Play On project itself, but that Play On launched this different way of thinking about Shakespeare that gives more options and more accessibility.
Will the collected works be available in print form at some point?
Yeah, we're definitely working on that. So here's something that was interesting to me. I come from Silicon Valley, and when you pay somebody to write something, at the end of it, you get to own it yourself. But in the theater world, what's much more common is you do a commission and you pay somebody to write something, and then at the end, the playwright owns it, the translator. So we now have, I think it's 36, because a few people did multiple plays, but we now have 36 translators out there, each with their own play. And that's a good thing because they've all got buddies, directors, and theater companies that they hang out with to try and get productions. Because we've had a number of productions, and they're so fun. But one of the things we did get as part of the commissioning project was the rights to publish. And so we haven't figured out the exact form. Do you want one giant book or a collection of little books or both? I think publication will be one of the next things.
Perhaps some of the reactions are, well, you're not going to replace Shakespeare. You can't touch Shakespeare. That kind of feeling that maybe Shakespeare will be put on the shelf forever. But I don't think that'll ever happen.
One of the things that's interesting to me as I've gotten into this project is I've learned how much every theater production of Shakespeare changes Shakespeare. The amount of Shakespeare that they leave on the cutting room floor is incredible. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is left on the cutting room floor because it's just too hard to understand. And so at some point I wonder, is it more respectful to Shakespeare to throw half of a play away, or is it more respectful to try and resurrect it? Right. And you can make a case for either one, but massive. Oh, the other thing a lot of people do is they'll substitute words, but only words that existed in Shakespeare's exact corpus, so words that he used in another play. Mm-hmm. And that work often is done by the actors and dramaturgs who are great people, but gosh, if someone's going to do that, wouldn't you rather it was a poet who spent, in some cases, we've had people wrestling with these things for years, as opposed to people in the last minute crunch before a play trying to whip something up. I feel like we're respecting the bard a lot.
Yeah, I don't get a disrespect. But I do, I mean, it might be worse since we are a performative podcast. I just want to look at just a little, maybe 2-line section of the King Lear translation that you sent us.
Sure.
And I just want to talk about that for a second. And the lines are, let me see if I can read them. How shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, your looped and windowed raggedness, defend you from seasons such as these? That's the original Shakespeare. And the translation is, with no roof over your heads, no fat on your ribs, and only rags for clothing, how will you defend yourselves against such weather? So, those are the two differences. That's the translation. And right. Now, you're saying the same thing, and I get it. But I would argue that when I hear your looped and windowed raggedness, I might be thrown for a second, but if I image that, if I take that into my head and I image it, it's a really beautiful metaphor. And there's lovely sounds that are being combined that are sort of caressing the eardrums versus, and only rags for clothing. Now I understand
the beautiful ones are not faithful, and the faithful ones are not beautiful. Is that right? What you're pressing on?
I'm not. I'm actually not pressing on the beauty of the language. Actually, that's not at all what I'm pressing on.
The imagery you get.
But the imagery and the combination of the imagery and the effect of the sounds of spoken English on what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and that's part of the beauty. It's not just the language; it's the whole experience. It's what happens in your brain when you read that or hear it.
And I think that there's a visceral response to images like that I hope would not be lost completely.
Well, and that's why, thank goodness, the Shakespeare will be just fine. You know, there it is. Here's the effect that it has on my brain. When I get to a place like that, there's a big difference between reading and attending a play. Mm-hmm. In reading, I can say, whoa, what does that mean? And it can flower in my head. And that's fun. If that happens in a play, the effect is to erase the following lines because I'm contemplating this one. It's coming at me at lifetime speed. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is the lines that come immediately after this. What he just said is, oh, you poor people, how do you deal with this pelting rain when you've got no house and no clothes and you're hungry? What he says right after this is, oh, I have taken too little care of this. Take physic, pomp, expose thyself to feel what wretches feel, that thou may shake the superflux to them and show the heavens more just. What does that mean if you're just contemplating what looped and windowed meant? And it's a very, very important concept because what he's saying is, I didn't do a good job as your king. What he's saying is, oh, when I was king, I should have done more for you. It would do you good, men who live in luxury, to walk in the shoes of the poor and downtrodden, so that you can unburden yourself with the wealth that you do not need and show the world that heaven can be fair. That is a very deep self-reflection on his success or failure as a king. And I would argue, so the translation is from take physic, pomp. Take physic means apply medicine to yourself. Pomp means a royal guy, an elite guy. The translation being it would do you good, men who live in luxury. That when that stuff is coming at you in lifetime speed, I think there's very few people who speak Shakespearean English so well that they can process that line after line after line and really get the meaning. And but it's beautiful.
You'd be exhausted, right?
It's beautiful. And so what do you do with that? How do you deal with that conflict? And I think the answer is you have to have both.
I really sympathize with that point of view, Dave. I've had that experience so many times, and I'm sure all of our listeners do as well. It's a kind of a difference between being letting the stream of thought carry you all the way down to its conclusion, or being captured for a while in the eddies and the whirlpools along the way, and maybe missing what follows, which makes it fun to see a play again and again, because you're always catching new things that you missed previously, maybe for just that reason.
Let me tell you something that has stood out for me of this experience, having just seen all the plays. Shakespeare is so funny. Mm-hmm. Oh my God. Even plays that you think of as serious, heavy-duty plays, there will be parts that you just laugh. One of the people I was seeing a play with said it was like Quentin Tarantino. Some of his stuff is just so over the top, crazy and wild that you're just like, oh my God. And I will say Titus Andronicus was like that.
Yeah, and Titus Andronicus, certain parts of Richard III.
The contrast of the laughter and the not laughter. So at the very end of Titus Andronicus, I don't want to spoil this for anyone who hasn't seen it, but his daughter's had her hands cut off and her tongue cut out, and she's been raped, but she's still there, and Titus has served up the sons that did this to their mom and dad. And the play, it's like 3 lines of Shakespeare, Titus kills so-and-so. 2 more lines of Shakespeare, so-and-so other person kills another guy at the dinner table. It's just a train wreck. And then comes the point where Titus asks the king, the father of the 2 sons that did the killing, what would you do if you had a child and she was horribly molested, raped, and how would you deal, disfigured, how would you deal with that? And the king said, I would kill her to put her out of her misery. And at that point, Titus takes his dagger and kills his daughter. And so we were laughing, and the whole theater just like shut down. Like, whoa, that now it's not funny anymore. I think the heightening of the comedy intensifies the tragedy. And if you're not getting the jokes, I think Shakespeare is whipping you up and whipping you down. It's back and forth. So the comedy can be such an important part also of the tragedies. What a fun project this has been. I'm just blown away with what's all in my head right now.
Yeah, your enthusiasm is absolutely fantastic. And certainly, just to go back to the point you just made, Shakespeare puts clowns after death a lot. And clowns are very difficult to understand in Shakespeare. They're very, that's where you get really dense language. But, so this is, your enthusiasm is terrific. You still have skeptics. You're about to go see Polishing Shakespeare, which is one of your skeptics' responses to your project. It'll be interesting to hear your reactions to his production.
Well, I've read the script. So it turns out that Brian Dykstra is the author of Polishing Shakespeare. His wife, Margaret, is friends with Doug Langworthy. I remember I told the story earlier about him doing the translations from German iambic pentameter and now the Henry Sixes. And so she came in and we got to chatting. And she's like, oh my God, my husband wrote this play. You're the evil guy. So I said, oh, that's cool. I want to meet him. So they came in. In fact, we did an experiment. The opening night of the reading of Our Much Ado About Nothing was the night before the opening of Much Ado About Nothing at Shakespeare in the Park. So I invited Brian and his wife to come along, and we saw both of those back to back. First our reading, and then the one in the park. And it was great seeing a reading ahead of the full production as opposed to, doing a No Fear Shakespeare. It was awesome. And we had a lot of fun and chatted a lot. Fundamentally, their view is whenever an audience doesn't understand, it's because the actors and the directors have failed the audience.
Correct.
And, my view is, I don't know what acting you could do to take physic pomp into it would do you good, men who live in luxury. Like, I don't know what gestures or vocal intonation an actor could conceivably do to communicate that. But fine. So we disagree. They think one can, and I think that there's certain things that are impossible, and they can keep trying to pull it off, which is great. and it makes the production so much better when you do try. Then I can say, and for the folks of us in the bottom 50% of the audience, we'll go see the translation reading ahead of time.
Well, Dave, this project has certainly, from your point of view, occupied you for many years, and you've invested in an incredible amount of time and treasure into it. What's the biggest takeaway that you've gotten from working on this?
My experience has grown over time. I was very excited to see the very first production, Timon of Athens. And, it turns out that's actually a really good play. It was never performed in Shakespeare's life, but Kenneth Cavender did both the translation, which is a line-by-line exercise, but also adaptation, cutting scenes, moving them around, rearranging a little bit. So he did the translation first and then the adaptation. I just loved it. I loved it, the clarity of it. The conversations that I had afterwards with people, like talking about the play, about the meaning of the play, and it's only grown from there. I think what I've enjoyed most is I get a lot less vitriol these days. I think there's people who like it more and people who like it less. Brian Dykstra, the conversations we had, but they weren't vitriolic at all. He had a different opinion than my opinion. He's got a different mental model of the best way to do some art. I've got a different model of a different way to do some art. Our art can coexist. I feel like the vitriol is mostly gone. And so I'm just excited that people are arguing about Shakespeare. How cool is that?
Yeah.
Both the language and the man, but also the message of different plays. That they feel so timely, a lot of them. I mean, Timon of Athens is about a really, really rich guy with a lot of political power who's wielding it with his friends. It's Shakespeare, who knew? It turns out he's a great writer. I really enjoyed chatting with you. To me, this is just about getting the ideas out. So if people can make up their own mind, but at least they can have a sense of what we're up to and why we think it makes sense.
That's what we're all about here at the State of Shakespeare.
Dave Hitz, it's been great talking to you. Thanks for spending the time to be on the program today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dave.
I'm Garrett Vandermeer.
And I'm Jim Elliott.
And thank you for listening to The State of Shakespeare. Thanks for joining us for the State of Shakespeare podcast. We invite you to visit stateofshakespeare.com for more episodes, information about each of our guests, and the Shakespeare text you heard on the program, and much more. And we welcome you to join the discussion by liking us on Facebook. That's www.stateofshakespeare.com. Thanks for listening.